Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for being with us on this Friday evening. We realize that there is so much going on and it's such a beautiful weather outside, and yet you took the time to spend it with us. And tonight, Her Migrant Hub, our team prepared for you an amazing webinar that is focusing on the trauma of forced migration. When we are talking about forced migration, people being forced out of their families, out of their communities, out of their countries, into new territories and unknown territories, there is a lot of trauma that they are facing. And tonight you will be hearing more about what kind of trauma, what are some of the symptoms, how can we detect them? And, we'll start learning about what can we do, right? So when we're talking about the trauma of migration, just to set the background, I would invite you to think of the loss that is encountered by migrants once they leave everything behind. The loss of certainty, the loss of identity, the loss of family, the loss of hope. And yet, despite all of this, there is a lot of resilience. So when we're talking about this darkness of trauma, it is resilience and coping that will help us see the light and will help us walk together through this journey to improve the lives of so many, to learn from them, and to do better. So with no further ado, I would invite our team to introduce themselves and take you on this journey.
Thank you so much, Marciana, and for your leadership. Hi, my name is Daniel Stern, and I'm one of the MSW student and co-facilitators today. And I would like to then pass it off to Sarah to introduce herself.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Soleil, and I'm also an MSW student at Fordham University. Pretty excited to be here today. Veronica, if you want to go ahead.
Hi, good evening. I'm Veronica Lozada. I'm an MSW student at Fordham, and I'm also co-facilitating today.
And we have three very special co-facilitators who are women activists. I'd like to introduce Vanessa, who later is going to share her story, but I'd like to just introduce her, have her introduce herself to you, for you.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. Welcome.
Thank you. And we do have a couple other co-facilitators. Andrena, unfortunately, could not make it today. And we will hear from Lily a little bit later, I believe.
Yes, Lily will be, I'll be sharing her story later.
Great. So thanks again for everybody who came. I know this is a Friday night, but we are here to raise her voice and shed light. And I hope everybody can see the light in the title, because we just changed it over to white because before it was actually too bright. And now I think it really encapsulates what we're talking about, because we're talking about the darkness of trauma and the light that we're going to bring with us today through the stories that we're going to be hearing. So this is actually a part two of, this is a second webinar of our series, but it's a part one of a part two series. So I just want to cover what we did last webinar, which is we covered basically what mental health is, which is it's the quality of the experience that a person has and is determined by psychological, sociological, physical, and emotional factors. And I think a real good question of what mental health is as opposed to saying what is wrong with you, instead saying what has happened to you. And so from there, we can then begin to understand what this is that we're talking about. And then last webinar, we also spoke about that the right to mental health support, which we're going to be talking about different services later on. And just to make sure that we just point out that everybody has a right to mental health services in the state and city of New York. And so what we try to aim today is to give you knowledge of some of the symptoms of the common mental health issues that are commonly experienced by forced migrant women, in addition to sharing those personal stories of those struggles from women with lived experiences who are going to show you what they went through and help others with what they might be going through today. And just to note, this webinar does not substitute for a professional diagnosis. We are giving out information, but we do advise that you must go to a professional to get a real actual diagnosis. And so because what we're talking about is so difficult, and because we usually don't have an opportunity to just pause, I'd like to take this moment to just allow us to close your eyes if you feel comfortable, and just start to take a pause and notice where you're at right now before we really delve into what we're going to be talking about. Because it really is difficult, and at any point during this webinar, please don't hesitate to step away and to really take care of yourself, because this is really what we're advocating for. So at any point, just notice how you're feeling and notice what might be coming up. So let's actually just do that right now and just see where we are individually, taking this moment to breathe and just see what's coming up for you, and just allowing yourself to be here in this space that we are creating from a place of love and not from a place of judgment. And so what does that feel like? What is that space? If we were going to create that internally right now for yourself, what kind of space would you want to create to be in? To be in a space to recognize these difficult issues and really to come from a place of gentleness and a place of care and a place of nurture and a place of support, which is what we are trying to create for you all today. And this is not easy stuff. And then we'll just begin to open our eyes and come back into the space. And just take a second to come back into the room. And as you heard before, we have her voice, which we have recorded for you here today. We're going to share Vanessas' story with you.
Hola, mi nombre es Vanessa Rosales y quiero contarles un poco de mi historia con el trastorno postraumático, la ansiedad y mis ataques de pánico. Estos síntomas comenzaron 6 meses después de haber llegado a los Estados Unidos buscando asilo. Recuerdo que estaba en la estación del tren, estaba esperando el tren, cuando de repente empecé a sentir que mi corazón latía muy rápido y una sensación como de incomodidad, una sensación de que tenía que salir de ese lugar rápidamente porque algo malo me iba a pasar. Y sentí como una sensación en mis oídos Y yo decía, oh, ¿qué es esto? No, nunca me había pasado y me dio mucho miedo. Me senté en una de las banquetas de la estación y, y me sujeté muy fuerte de la banqueta y respiraba, trataba de respirar con calma. Llamé a mi esposo y le dije, oh, tengo un síntoma, tengo una sensación rara. Y él me dijo, tranquila, esto debe ser que no dormiste bien o algo así. Y bueno, como a los 2 minutos pasó la sensación y no le presté más atención. Pero con el tiempo esa sensación siguió pasando y cada vez traía más síntomas nuevos. Recuerdo que como la tercera vez que me volvió a dar, iba en el tren y empecé a tener sensación de mareo, de que me iba a desmayar, debilidad en mis piernas, tenía sensación de vomitar y en mi corazón latía muy rápido y algo me decía que tenía que irme de ese lugar. El tren en ese momento estaba en movimiento y no tenía dónde ir. Le pedí auxilio a la persona que estaba al lado mío y le dije no me siento bien, pero la persona era nativa americana y no entendía mi español y yo en ese momento no podía hablar inglés y pues no me entendió. Lo que hice fue que me salí del tren en la siguiente estación y pedí ayuda inmediata a los empleados del servicio del tren. Les dije que no podía caminar, que tenía sensación de que me iba a desmayar, que tenía mucha taquicardia y malestar en mi pecho. Y entre más lo decía y más me preocupaba, más sentía estos síntomas. Llamaron la ambulancia y me llevaron a la emergencia a un hospital. En el hospital me midieron mi nivel de azúcar en sangre, la tensión, me hicieron exámenes y todo estaba normal. Entonces ellos me preguntaron si yo había bebido suficiente agua porque era verano. Yo dije que tal vez no habías bebido la suficiente agua. Y me dijeron, bueno, vete a tu casa, todo está muy bien, probablemente estabas deshidratada. Y me fui a mi casa. Pero esta situación pasó muchas otras veces, estando en mi casa, estando en la calle, tenía estos síntomas y yo me preocupé. Fui al médico y me hicieron un cuestionario y en este cuestionario se dieron cuenta que yo tenía depresión. En el hospital entonces me mandaron un medicamento. Yo empecé a tomar el medicamento y la primera día que lo tomé en la noche, esa noche, me desperté y estaba muy mareada. Sentía que todo se estaba colocando oscuro y pensé que me iba a desmayar. Me asusté mucho y mi esposo llamó a la ambulancia al 911. Los del 911 llegaron, me tomaron la atención y me revisaron, me dijeron probablemente es que tú tienes los efectos del medicamento. Tranquila, eso se va a ir pasando poco a poco. ¿Quieres ir a la emergencia? Yo dije, no, si soy el medicamento me quedo en mi casa. Me dio mucho miedo y no pude tomar más el medicamento. Igual no hubo un seguimiento del medicamento por parte del servicio médico. Yo solamente les comenté que el medicamento me había causado ese efecto tan desagradable en mi estómago, en mi cerebro, que me había querido desmayar y me lo cambiaron por otro. Yo empecé a tomar este otro medicamento, pero nunca más nadie me llamó ni me dijo, mira cómo te está cayendo el medicamento. No hubo un control, a mi parecer no hubo un control, un seguimiento de mi tratamiento médico. Yo decidí suspender el medicamento. Yo dije, no voy a seguir tomando este medicamento. Eso fue una decisión que aún valoro como que tal vez no fue la correcta. Con el tiempo esos síntomas siguieron empeorando. Cada vez iba a la emergencia. Yo decía, tengo taquicardia, tengo presión en mi pecho, tengo susto, siento que voy a morir, me dan ganas de vomitar. y me hacían exámenes y nada pasaba. Todo estaba bien, vete a tu casa, si te vuelve a dar, vuelves a venir a la emergencia. Esto pasó muchas veces. Hasta que un día conversé con la médico tratante y le dije de la emergencia y le dije, esto me está pasando desde hace mucho tiempo y nadie dice que tengo. Solamente me dicen, estás bien, vete a tu casa, si te vuelve a dar, vuelves a venir. Y yo ese día le expliqué, le dije, yo soy una persona inmigrante, buscadora de asilo, que vivió en unas situaciones violentas en su país y que por tal motivo yo me sentía muy deprimida, que eso me hacía sentir muy triste. Y esta doctora me envió con el servicio social.
So I'd just like to just take a pause here for a second and just reflect on her journey and recognizing some of the symptoms that she was going through, that she experienced first at the train station and then kept continuing even though she went continually to the physician. And it wasn't up until this last point that she spoke to a physician about her experience. And I just want to emphasize that point. So up until that point, she wasn't really being heard. And she finally got to this point where she told the physician that, hey, this is the situation. This is a little bit about my history. And then it sort of created this way that she could be heard and listened to for the first time and able to be sent to the social services to finally get to a place where she could be helped. So I'm just wondering if anybody has any questions so far up to this point, either in her story or overall in general for what we're talking about today. You can always use the Q&A, so feel free to ask a question at any point. And I'd like to open up to Vanessa if she'd like to talk about what that experience was like when she was telling the physician about the experience that she was having and why she wasn't being helped the way that she should have been.
That day I decided to talk to the doctor about my immigration situation and about my trauma, because I went to the hospital, the emergency room. I called 911 many times. And I said, and that day I thought, how many times more I gonna do that? So I need help. I need to come to the hospital and somebody help me. So it's not easy to talk about your experience in your country when you have violence in your country. But that day I say I need to find help, and that was the reason.
Thank you. And I think that one thing that we talked about earlier was that you don't have to talk about every detail of your experience to let the doctor know that you have a unique experience and to better understand the nature of the help that you need. You don't have to go into detail, but just to sort of give some information about what you are going through and maybe why, based on what happened in the past. And it's very difficult, like Vanessa said, to be able to communicate that. And that's one of the things that we are really trying to support the women in being able to tell their story and able to get the help that they need. So we're gonna check out part 2 of this.
En la oficina del servicio social, la trabajadora social me busco una oficina o una organización o una institución que tratara personas con trastorno postraumático que provenían de otros países o que personas que habían sido víctimas de violencia, personas que hayan sido sobrevivientes de maltrato. Y entonces ella me mandó a esa institución. Y estando allá yo empecé un tratamiento de psicoterapia. Aparte también me dieron tratamiento médico. El tratamiento médico fue bastante difícil poderlo tomar porque me había quedado el miedo con las medicinas que había tomado anteriormente. Pero el tratamiento psicológico de terapia ha sido excelente. Todas las semanas, desde hace ya más de un año, tengo conversación por 1 hora con una terapista. Mi psiquiatra me llama temporalmente, está pendiente de mí y me hacen sentir como más en confianza. Sé que ellos han tratado a muchas personas con esta dificultad y ellos saben lo que hacen y mi confianza con ellos ha sido muy grande y mi mejoría ha sido muy, muy, muy grande. Me siento ahora muy feliz y con esta historia pues les dejo a ustedes pensar que no estamos solos, que en la ciudad de Nueva York tienes instituciones preparadas y que entienden esta situación de lo que es el trauma, todo lo que trae el trauma de síntomas en una persona. Solamente hay que poder hablar con sinceridad con los médicos, pedirles ayuda, explicar nuestra situación personal un poco con ellos para que ellos puedan encontrar una ayuda lo más pronto posible. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for sharing your voice and potentially helping out so many women who are going to be listening to this webinar. I think that you showed a lot of strength and resilience, not only in going through what you went through, but really opening up about what you went through and sharing your story with others. And a little bit later, you'll be hearing about Vanessa's symptoms a little bit more as we go through. But now I'd like to take a moment to talk a little bit more about post-traumatic stress disorder, which is also known as PTSD, which you heard from Vanessas Story. And so with the understanding that trauma is it can be a response, or a traumatic experience is an experience which is very impactful in a person's life, and that can impact a person's mental health for years to come if not dealt with. And so post-traumatic means that this happens after the event and is continuing to occur way after the fact. And so what makes a disorder is the continuation of the effects of the trauma that was initially experienced at that time. And so what this means is that a person might experience that trauma in the present moment, which could be triggered by anything. For example, just being at a train station, as we saw with the just being in just fear and not really knowing what's going on, and just complete shock, because this is just because of the trauma that might have come from a previous time. And in combination with that, it also has to do with social factors. So within the experience of forced migration, we're talking about not only the experience in having been forced out of one's country and having to start over again, but starting over again in a place that might not be friendly to immigrants. And so we're talking a lot about a lot of different triggers and a lot of different things that can compile and sort of make it difficult to address the initial trauma of what might have happened in the past, because what is happening now is something that is not allowing for that to allow the person to get in a place to be able to talk about these things and just to be able to function on a day-to-day level, because there's so many different things. And I want to talk about some of the symptoms, which we heard about the confusion, just the terror, the withdrawal, just feeling numb. And every case is individual and unique, and depends on what happened to you, and what is happening now, and what is the situation that you're living in currently. And all this is tied completely with the experience of being a forced migrant and continuing to have that experience. And so what I want to talk about is also how we cope with these traumatic experiences, because these can often be a key factor in addressing the issue. So a lot of mechanisms which are used to cope with situations are disassociation, which is sort of when you create this self that you don't identify with, or so there's a part of you that you feel like isn't you anymore because it's too painful. It's just too painful to be who you are. And so this is an example of disassociation. So you sort of are living your life as if you're not a person. And this is very common in the experience of forced migration, because it's an identity crisis, having to reinvent yourself. And so the combination of really coming from another country and experiencing violence, and then coming to this new place, which isn't necessarily safe, really forces a person to be outside of themselves, because it's just too much. Another thing is emotion-focused coping, which really is sort of like trying to fix your own emotions. So you're sort of seeing your emotions as like the enemy, as the problem that needs to be fixed. And so what happens is when we feel things, we think, well, that's the problem. I feel that, and I need to fix that. But in reality, it's really how we deal with the emotions. It's not the emotion itself. And we can go into adaptive coping mechanisms, which and these are not, I'm not advocating for anything in particular, but these have worked for people. Religion is one. Community is really a huge coping mechanism, and it's something that we're creating here, and has really helped a lot of women in the project. Another one is creativity. So like, what can we create out of the pain? And a lot of art has been made through this and can be potentially healing. Another, like, the prevalence of PTSD in forced migration is pretty high. So refugees who haven't treated PTSD are likely to have a continuation of their symptoms for at least a decade after their traumatic experience, which significantly interferes with the quality of life. And the prevalence of PTSD, depression, anxiety, and psychosis are around 31%. And compared to host populations, they're 10 times more likely to experience PTSD. So this is something that is really a huge issue, and it can be attributed to a number of risk factors, which are things that have happened in the past and things that are happening in the present that are really creating this sort of scenario for the problem to continue. And it really has to do with issues of access to opportunities connected to what we've been talking about, which are the social determinants of health, which are like education, money, housing, all these things contributing to all of the mental health issues. So it's not just this thing that happens in a psychological bubble. It is connected to all aspects of society. And right now I'm going to send it over to Veronica, who's going to tell another story.
Veronica, just before we get started, I just want to also add, because it's really important to recognize with PTSD that it can result either from directly experiencing a life-threatening or terrifying event, but it can also result from just witnessing those kinds of events, right? So you might be questioning, why am I experiencing these things? I wasn't directly involved. Well, just even witnessing these kinds of terrifying, life-threatening events can lead to PTSD and the kinds of symptoms that Vanessa shared and Daniel has been speaking to. It's also really important to note that really common symptoms with PTSD also include flashbacks and like having nightmares and this feeling of constantly reliving the event. Just want to make those, highlight those symptoms as well. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dana. I'm going to read Lily's story. It's a Friday afternoon. I'm sitting at my window enjoying the sun, the smell of nature, the tree right before the apartment starts burgeoning. It's spring 2022. A few years earlier, none of this was noticeable to me. I was too absorbed by my problems and my pains. My trauma was speaking louder than anything surrounding me. I recall this day when I was walking in the streets of New York City, and I suddenly started crying. This lady stopped by and asked how she could help. I couldn't stop crying. I just wanted my beautiful and successful past life to come back. But I knew in my inner self that this was gone forever, and that I would have to adjust and adapt if I wanted to make it. I had to put myself in survival mode and quiet my pain. First thing was to make a living. I then found a job. I remember these days as if it was yesterday. Every morning, I pretended everything was all right in my life. But once I got back home, I was the unhappiest person in the world. I recall going to bed every night and praying to God that I didn't wake up anymore. I lost hope in humanity. Everyone I encountered was a potential threat to me. After the trauma, it was difficult to trust again. I saw the devil in anyone who approached me in a certain way. I suspected everyone was trying to hurt me. I was emotionally unstable, sometimes laughing, and a minute later crying. What a mess I was. I attended a few counseling sessions. I participated in a couple of yoga activities that helped to control my mood, but the pain was still there. In 2021, when I joined her migrant hub, I was very far from realizing how much I would learn about mental health. In the society where I come from, mental health is associated with craziness, someone who lost his or her mind. At her migrant hub, we feel listened to. Nobody will judge you. Nobody will take advantage of you. It's all about sharing and serving. Meeting after meetings, I was able to name each mental symptom I experienced: excessive paranoia, worry, anxiety, long-lasting sadness, and irritability. But I'm glad I'm using the past tense, as today my life is much better and I'm emotionally stable, even though I will never forget. I'm glad to be an asset for her migrant hub and will continue to contribute as much as possible. Thank you, Lily.
Thank you so much, Veronica, for sharing Lily's story. We do have Lily today via chat, who will be able to participate with anybody who has questions or comments for her. And thank you so much, Lily, for sharing such a powerful story that touched on such a relatable and important topic many of us have experienced. Because the thing is, we often journey through our lives and face many unique experiences that trigger our core feelings of happiness, sadness, anger, and fear, just to name a few. And I'm gonna ask Daniel if you can, thank you so much, Daniel. And so some of these are the core feelings that we do often feel during certain moments. And some moments might, be happy and we celebrate and it triggers that moment of happiness. And other moments, we might find ourselves feelings of anxiousness and being worried in response to specific identifiable situations that trigger these feelings. And for example, this could be become fearful and anxious surrounding a big exam, an interview for a job, or the prospect of just relocating to a new home. And while we are able to identify these situations as a trigger for our feelings, there are other times that the trigger may become less and less clear. Sorry, Daniel. Thank you. So what's the difference between fear and anxiety? And when we look at fear itself, it's an emotional response to a known, definite external threat. It is often associated with a fight or flight reaction. So do we stay and fight, or do we leave and escape the danger? At some point, we heard Lily say, I saw the devil in anyone who approached me in a certain way. I suspected everyone was trying to hurt me. And how do we decipher between objects that are causing us to feel dangers versus objects that are perceived normal? And so this could be one of the things that we can touch on today. So when you feel afraid, the 5 senses are triggered. So seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touch, translate information happening in our immediate environment to situations that could become dangerous. So for example, when we see a vicious looking animal running towards us, hearing footsteps behind us, approaching us, smelling smoke in our house, our brain immediately switches over to a fear response. And this happens automatically. So we have this like definite external threat that's happening. We trigger our 5 senses, and then an automatic switch happens where we feel like we are not in control of how we react. We have this emotion and we just simply react. So this core feeling causes us to change in our body, similar to that of anxiety, which could be a little confusing sometimes. And that's because it's the fear's job to just get the body ready to fight or flee this dangerous situation. So just imagine for a moment, we are walking down the street of New York City, and a car, as we're crossing the street, starts beeping at us loudly with their horn. And this startles us. Our heart starts racing, our breathing becomes shallower and faster. We might jump or flinch in reaction. And all these physical changes that fear causes promotes a rapid response to danger. So that way we either run or we face it. So that way we are automatically reacting at that moment to this perceived danger. So now this brings us to anxiety. We know what fear is, which is something automatic and external that's happening. We're reacting to something that's external, but anxiety refers to the anticipation of a future concern. So something that could potentially happen. It is both a cognitive, emotional thought and physical response to an internal sensation. So something that's inside of us, unknown, vague threat, such as the uneasiness you might feel when you're walking down a dark street alone. So this situation can be caused by anxiety, unrelated to the possibility of something bad happening. You feel like, something bad is going to happen because potentially a stranger could come and harm you while you're alone in this dark street. So rather than it being an immediate threat, it's something that could possibly happen. And this anxiety stems from our mind's interpretation of the possible dangers. Now, what makes anxiety a bit confusing is that we can experience it due to something upsetting us in the present, and it could be something unclear or unidentifiable, but it could also be something in the past that continues to influence us. So speaking on like Lily's story, just touching a bit on it, when she did say, her past trauma was triggering her to see everybody as the devil. This was a situation where no matter what situation she was approached with, it could have been all danger to her. And this could have her perceive or anticipate the possibility of danger in the future, causing the anxiety reaction. And so while it is normal or natural to face certain situations with fear and anxiety, because it kind of helps us anticipate and react to danger and certain risks, it becomes an issue when our concerns become constant, when we face these situations or anticipate these situations on an extreme level. So some individuals may find themselves spending the majority of their times feeling worried, anxious about their anxiety, which can interfere with their daily lives and relationships, like going to work, maybe even, going to sleep or being in a relationship. It could trigger a lot of these like feelings. So while all these emotions are physical in nature, we can sense them in our body. So when we take a moment and we slow down a little bit, and we just look at what happens to our body and face during anxiety, we notice that a variety of the sensations are physical and it changes. And the physical symptoms and thoughts build off of one another and basically feed off of each other to serve and increase the anxiety. So for example, or for a moment, when the physical sensation begins, if we have a moment where we have rapid heartbeat, or we feel like we have some chest tightness, or we can't breathe adequately, that triggers a feeling in us where we feel like, something dangerous is about to happen or something bad is about to happen. And this then it causes our body, it causes us to increase in our feelings of anxiety, because now I can't breathe, something bad's about to happen, and now I'm very, very anxious, which then turns my body physically to react to these symptoms by not being able to possibly breathe like effectively, or feeling weakness or dizziness. And so some of these symptoms are physical symptoms, and they're very diverse. So you could have stomach pain, nauseousness, or digestive trouble that can cause, that can stem from anxiety. Anxiety can, be seen as headaches or trouble sleeping, waking up frequently at night, having fatigue or dizziness, weakness, some rapid heart rate, sweating, shortness of breath, clenching your jaw, flushed cheeks, dry mouth, trembling or shaking, some muscle tension or pain that can make you feel like you're on edge, cold, sweaty, tingling in your hands and feet are all physical symptoms of anxiety. And when we're looking at psychological symptoms of anxiety, we're thinking about a person that thinks about the problems over and over again. Sorry, Daniel, I'm just going to ask you to press the button one more time. Okay, so we have fear, we have irritability, we have feelings of being on edge, which is causing that, muscle tension, sleep disturbance, feeling a little panicked, some appetite disturbances, feeling restless, uneasiness, intense feeling of dread, doom, and danger. And what's common also is flashbacks and nightmares, and then intensely and obsessively avoiding feared objects or places. Okay, so I'm going to invite Vanessa to speak a little bit on her experiences with anxiety symptoms that could have been physical or psychological.
In my case, some physical symptoms that I felt were heart beating, my heart beating very fast, and that made me feel in discomfort. I feeling dizzy, like I was going to pass out, weakness in my legs. I feel like I want to vomit, like I need to throw out everything. My heart was beating very fast, and that made me feel worried. And when I feel worried, my heart beating more faster each time. About my psychological symptoms, I feel that something bad is gonna happen anytime. Going to the bathroom, go out, sit down to eat. Everything that I want to do, everything is scaring me, and I was thinking, oh, I'm gonna die for doing anything that normal person do in their daily day. So um, and the more that I say that, I more I worry I became, and the more symptoms increasing. It's like a circle. You think something bad is happened, and increasing the symptoms.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for sharing, because a lot of times, we do have these very real, very relatable experiences where what do you do in that situation when you are faced with physical and psychological symptoms of anxiety? Because it could feel very overwhelming. I know at some point, Vanessa, you spoke about being on that train and not knowing what to do to kind of like deal with those feelings. And so sometimes, there isn't a correct way to approach it, but there are some healthy coping mechanisms that we could touch on today. And part of that is when we're working through anxiety, it could be very helpful to kind of get to a quiet place to slow down a little bit. So you want to feel your feet on the ground and take about 6 deep belly breaths. And that means just inhaling and feeling it in your stomach, and exhaling slowly. So that way you could do that about 6 times and getting yourself to a stage where you're able to even process those emotions and begin to calm the anxiety. After that, when you get to that peaceful space, we have to get curious about what the core emotions we might be experiencing are, and asking yourself, is this something scary or dangerous happening to me right now? If I am going too fast in a car, or if I'm getting beeped at by somebody or boarding an airplane, I might say yes to this question. But some situations might not really warrant it. It could just be, I'm kind of like, not looking forward to going to take this exam right now. It's not life threatening, so I could say no. And so that's how you kind of discern this experience as anxiety. And for example, let's take Steve, who who faces feelings like fear every time his boss assigns him a task. And this is determined as anxiety and not fear, because it does not put him in danger or a place where he needs to survive. But when he was a little boy, we know that Steve made a mistake. And every time he made a mistake doing a task, he was chastised and humiliated. So as an adult, Steve, in his mind, equates doing these tasks with the memory of being shamed, which then triggers his anxiety. And so he is faced with this, like, anticipation of something bad happening, which causes his anxiety. And instead of like it being fear, this is definitely anxiety. We have the power to move through our anxiety and fear to increase our future well-being. So we have to navigate through it and to process this fear and other core emotions. There are a multitude of techniques, amongst them this one, where that can be used alone with a support person or a professional counselor. That is highly encouraged, so you can work through these emotions. And today, one of our, sorry, I think Vanessa, if you want to introduce her. Thank you so much.
This is a nice story about my friend Alexandra. It's a little different than my history, but it's very interesting to pay attention to the details. I share it with you guys.
Hola, soy Alexandra, soy de Venezuela. Llegué a Nueva York en el 2019. Esos primeros meses aquí en Nueva York fueron de mucha novedad para mí. Una ciudad nueva, una ciudad enorme, el centro del mundo. Ese primer diciembre para mí fue la primera Navidad que viví aquí. Fue emocionante, fue todo nuevo. Fue siempre impresionarme por algo. Vivir las nevadas aquí. Que a pesar de que vengo de Mérida, pues no se viven tan intensamente como aquí. Las decoraciones, todo eso me llenó y todo era muy nuevo para mí. como estaba recién llegada, pues mi familia pues como que no la extrañaba tanto. Cuando ya voy a pasar mi segunda Navidad aquí en Nueva York, fue súper triste encontrarme que iba a estar lejos de ellos, que no iba a tener todo lo que normalmente nosotros tenemos como unión familiar en una Navidad. Fue súper duro para mí, además de que ya tenía una súper exigencia en el trabajo porque era Navidad y son los meses de mayor venta en la empresa. Y bueno, eso fue súper fuerte para mí porque estaba entre estrés y depresión, creo. Estaba triste por mi familia y estresada por el trabajo. Yo misma me detecté que estaba así. Yo tenía ya como que sobrecarga en el trabajo y por alguna razón se me cayó el cabello. Empecé a presentar alopecia, que se caen los mechones del cabello. O sea, un día recuerdo que para Thanksgiving del 2020 mi esposo y yo íbamos a correr 21 kilómetros en agradecimiento por todas las cosas que hemos recibido aquí en este país. Y me estoy haciendo mi clineja y cuando veo que me falta, tengo un hueco aquí en la frente. Y yo, oh Dios, esto es alopecia. Yo ya sabía que era alopecia porque tenía un sobrinito que le había dado alopecia. Y yo tengo que controlar esto. La única manera es como relajarme, respirar profundo, en fin. Empecé una rutina todas las mañanas de unas meditaciones de agradecimiento y después 10 minutos de yoga. Eran prácticas que yo ya había hecho en Mérida y pues las había olvidado con todo el ajetreo de la vida y entonces empecé a practicarlas de nuevo. Pero también me conseguí un grupo en Vía, que es un grupo de venezolanos que ofrecen el soporte con ayuda de expertos, de psicólogos, y de otras personas que tenemos las mismas situaciones o estamos en el mismo entorno, pues estamos así como que nos apoyamos unos a otros. Y pues conseguí muchísimo apoyo en ellos y pues el hablar y expresar cómo sentía pues me ayudó muchísimo. Esa es mi historia.
Thank you to Alexandra for sharing her story. She touched on a lot of important symptoms that forced migrants experience, along with Lily. They both mentioned depression symptoms, which include sadness and irritability, fatigue, insomnia. And the majority of people who experience depression typically report irritability as being the most common symptom. There's this misconception that being depressed is when you're feeling very sad, but people with depression usually experience irritability along with feelings of like missing out on things that feelings of enjoying things that you used to do before that made you happy, pain for no apparent reason, fatigue, issues with sleep, either sleeping too much or too little, feeling isolated, something that Alexandra spoke about. And she said she was missing her family. She had to spend Christmas. It was just her and her husband, and she has a big family back home. So definitely experiences of isolation, suicidal thoughts, trouble concentrating, feelings of guilt or worthlessness. And also depression can affect your appetite, either overeating or not even wanting to eat at all. Just want to share some statistics about depression. It's one of the most common mental health issues in the United States. And according to a study by the National Library of Medicine, their analysis of 16,121 migrant participants found that a little over a quarter of them suffer from depression. So that's a large number when you look at the amount of participants. a lot of forced migrants are experiencing symptoms of depression. And immigrants, particularly women, are more likely to have undiagnosed depression or depressive symptoms. They're more likely to brush it off or, avoid going to the doctor, or say they, depending on what culture they come from, that it's nothing, they can deal with it. And just click one more time, Daniel. Thank you. And another time. So there are different treatments for depression. The most effective treatments for depression are psychotherapy or talk therapy. Also what Vanessa mentioned, and Alexandra, going to group. I think they both attend group through RIF and VIA. So talking about your feelings, talking about your past, and talking through it, working through it, and trying to come up with coping mechanisms is very helpful. Another treatment is medication, which some people, as Vanessa mentioned in her story in the beginning, she remember she was just given this medication by a doctor, but no one explained to her how to take it. So it's very important to seek treatment in forms of medication and psychotherapy together. That way you have, your therapist asking you how the medication is working for you. You have a psychiatrist who is monitoring whether that medication is working, or if another one needs to replace it, depending on the side effects you're experiencing. And this is important to avoid what Vanessa went through. She was kind of afraid of taking medication the second time because of her first experience. And that can be avoided when you have a good monitoring system through medical professionals like a doctor or psychiatrist. And another treatment that tends to work if you do it in conjunction with therapy and medication is exercise. If you recall from her story, Alexandra mentioned she was doing yoga, and Sarah also suggested some breathing techniques. Other people like to do meditation, like what we did in the beginning. And all of this helps in order for you to manage your breathing and your anxiety, which goes hand in hand with depression. So if you couple all of these treatments together, it is possible to deal with your depression and other symptoms that come along with it. Now I'm gonna pass it on to Sarah. She's gonna read a poem that one of our women activists wrote.
Thank you so much, Veronica. That was very, very insightful. And Andrea Zuluega was unable to be here today, but she did write this beautiful poem that I will be narrating right now. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter when you came here. It doesn't matter your nationality. What matters is who you are now. You have a value inherent to your person. This is a process of adaptation. We are here to hear from you, to support you in the migration grief. There is uncertainty about your whereabouts. There is readjustment to your new location. There are thousands of questions in your mind. Here is a place to find yourself again. I want to thank Andrea one more time. While she couldn't be here, she did write this beautiful poem that she wanted to share with all of us. But she also touched on resources. And a lot of our women activists were able to let us know resources in the community that have helped them in different ways. And these are some of the resources that Andrea will speak on right now.
Hi everyone, this is a resource space. In her migranthood, we had a safe space for you to look for the help that you need. We are women activists sharing our stories, our experience, and the immigration path, the struggles of the anxiety, depression, and the PTSD, and we are bringing support like a team and like a group. We are developing a mental health support group, and I strongly recommend you to look for us in the website. We also had a RIF, that is an emotional support community for asylum seekers, migrants, and refugees, and they meet once in a week. And we also had a Venezuelan Immigrants Aid peer-to-peer emotional support group where you could look for the help that you need. I strongly recommend you guys to express yourself and communicate your feelings and your thoughts with somebody that you trust in. This is a safe space to you, and you could look for the websites in the next slides. Thank you very much.
So while there are a lot of resources that are available, and then you can find them through Her Migrant Hub, the RIF and VIA resources are very helpful, as well as resources for the community members. So now this brings us to the conclusion of our discussion today. And I just wanted to kind of bring it back to everyone and take a moment and see if anybody had any comments on resources that was helpful to you guys when you were looking for support in your community, or if you have any questions at all. Thank you.
I don't think we have anything in the Q&A. I don't know if Dana wanted to just make a comment, I don't know, about anything.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. I just want to thank our women activists who shared their stories this evening. I think it was very brave to share such vulnerable experiences. It will certainly help others who may be going through similar situations to realize that they're not alone in what they're feeling and experiencing. So thank you so much. Also, I think, you know, when Marciana opened the webinar this evening, she spoke to the idea of coping and resilience. We've spent a lot of time this evening talking about mental health issues and symptoms and challenging experiences. And I think it's important to remember that knowledge is certainly power and can set the stage for coping and resilience. And so we hope that you leave this webinar this evening having either gained insight into symptoms you might be experiencing, or to better understand what someone in your social network might be going through so that you can better support them. And ideally, learn something this evening that will be helpful for you, that you can carry into your world and use to set the stage for coping and resilience. So thank you so much to everyone.